Hi, welcome to the lecture on cascading style sheets and HTML. Now the question is, didn't I already learn HTML? Well, you may have taken a course and learned HTML in the past. However, with all things with a computer, uh, the technology has evolved and there are new and better methods necessarily for creating web pages. And this lesson is focused on XHTML and cascading style sheets that you can use to create pages that are optimized for search engines. So that the sites that you create will be found by people looking for your content. A term you may hear sometimes on the internet is search engine optimization. Search engine optimization means that the document is optimized for being scanned by a search engine so that when people go to, let's say, Google and search for something that may be on your web page, your page will appear higher in the search results because the page itself is constructed in a way that the search engines can better understand what uh, your document contains and how it relates to the person's search terms. So, in general, a web page that is constructed um, to be read by the search engine will appear higher in the search results. Now, everything starts with HTML. In the past, what was happening is that people would use HTML to create a page's uh, appearance and content. So they would use HTML to format their content for the person looking at it in the web browser. And for a long time, for a while, this worked. However, this approach has some challenges, which we'll get to in a second. The the challenge that people had was that, let's say you had a site that had maybe 100 different web pages. And in the old model, what people would do is in each one of those 100 web pages, they would have the styling component to uh, of the page encoded or written into the actual web page. So if, let's say, someone wanted to change the design for a website that consisted of 100 pages, if the styling of that website was done within those pages, they would have to manually edit all 100 pages to update the website to have the new appearance that someone wanted to use. However, this, as you can imagine, as the internet evolved, created huge problems because anytime someone wanted to do even a minor change to a site, to change the font or to change where some content was, how content was being presented, the site change could take many days or weeks, or it may not even be possible at all in a site that had lots of pages in it. So early in the 1990s, um, a technology was developed called cascading style sheets. And basically what cascading style sheets allowed was that people were able to set the style or the visual appearance of the web page in a single file, and then that single file would be referenced by all of the pages on the site. And what that allowed the web designers to do was all of the styling or the visual appearance could be controlled in that one page, and when that one page was updated or one file was updated, that style would cascade through all of the other pages connected to it. So it didn't matter, once you started to use cascading style sheets, it didn't matter whether you had a style sheet that was for one page or 5,000 pages. It greatly improved the ability of the designer to manage large numbers of web pages, made it possible for us to really have modern websites as we see them today. Now you may question why I bring up XML in a lecture on HTML and cascading style sheets. Well, we're not going to go into the technology of XML. It's important that you are aware of it because the future of web page design is linked to the technology of XML. All right, so what is XML? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. Basically, XML is a file format that allows people, that's easy for people to read, or easier for people to read, and easier for machines to read, so that information can be stored in files that both machines and computers can read. And a human cares that the page is readable from, they don't want to read a lot of characters that are not necessarily related to the content. And a computer, it needs to be able to read a page in a way that can describe the content to it in a standardized way. Now, you may never have heard of XML before, but you probably have used it all the time. Now, anytime you subscribe to an RSS feed or see an RSS feed, that's a format of XML. If you've ever heard of something called a web service, that uses XML a lot. If you ever used Facebook and installed an application that asks you, do you want to have this application have access to your Facebook account, that's done through a web service and usually done through XML. If you have ever created a podcast requires a XML file to be used with it so that people can subscribe to the XML file, and that XML file has a location of the media files that people download for their podcast. So XML files are used everywhere. And now that what's been the standard relatively for the last few years is a format of web pages that use XML in them. And we'll get to that in a minute. All right, so why do you use XML? Like I said, XML is human and machine readable. It allows you to structure data so it can be read by a machine and allows it to be imported and exported by computer programs in a neutral format. And the other advantage to it is that content that's created in XML can be validated with an external file, which is called a DTD or schema file, that basically enforces the organization of a XML file to meet a certain standard. So how does XML work? XML is written in plain text. It uses a tree structure, and at the most basic level, each item on the tree is referred to as an element. This is an example of an XML file. At the top of the page, you will see that it identifies the version number of XML, which is right here. You'll see that, remember I said that there's a doc type. So here's the doc type identification, and it says note.dtd. That is the that is used to validate the format of this XML file. And then here is the contents of the file. So each one of these items within the brackets looks like is an element. And it kind of looks a lot like XML or HTML, if you've ever seen HTML code before. So you have an open bracket, you have a tag such as note, you have a closing bracket, and then you have down here to, and then tov is the data, and the tag is closed here too. So this looks a lot like HTML, and then here note closes it. So what basically somebody came up with was, hey, XML looks a lot like HTML. So let's make a XML document or an HTML document that uses um, XML, an XML uh, DTD to enforce the contents of or the organization of the website or of the web page. So what they did was they created a DTD of HTML a DTD that contains a set of validated HTML tags so that a page could be validated or standardized to meet a certain format and organization and use certain tags because in HTML because prior to um, the standardization a lot of HTML tags could be used that would create problems for different browsers, would create problems for people that were, there was a million different ways that you could accomplish the same thing because there are lots of different tags that could be used for very similar purposes. And so what they basically did was decide, well, let's create a DTD or a validation method to validate all of the HTML tags that we think are absolutely necessary for creating a web page. And just for an example, this is basically what a DTD looks like. We're not going to look at how to create one, but I thought you might want to see what a DTD looks like. This is a DTD for the XML example we used on the previous slide. If you want to learn more about XML, you can go to this web address, and this has a good tutorial on what XML is and how it's used. Right, so what we're primarily going to focus on today is XHTML, or Extensible Hypertext Markup Language, which is just, to understand it, it is a HTML, basically what it is a DTD, or the validation specification, that makes only a limited set of HTML tags available to be used inside an HTML document. And what it does is sort of combine, it is a combination of the structured data format of XML with the styling ability or organization of HTML. And so the goal of XHTML is to create documents that are easy for humans and machines to be able to read, so that documents are easy for search engines to find, and so that in the future, as web technologies evolve, people's content inside web pages doesn't have to be restyled or reformatted for different as technology evolves. So what it's trying to do is basically standardize how web content is stored in a web page, so that in the future people will be able to update the styling of it, but they won't have to change the actual document itself to meet a new set of standards. And what you'll find is that XML or XHTML is a combination of XML and what's called HTML 4.1 strict. So basically, XHTML is a strict validated version of HTML 4.1 that ensures portability and data longevity. It is not to make it look pretty, rather it is a way to enforce simplicity and structure for an HTML document. Because you have to remember that the correct way to produce a HTML page now is not to use HTML with styling tags embedded into it. It is only to use the HTML tags to actually become to structure the content so it can be stored, and then use CSS to actually style and change the visual appearance of the web page. And so, if you've ever seen a web page, the HTML code before, a lot of this will look very similar to you, but there are a couple changes. The first thing that you'll notice is that the very first line of an XHTML web page is going to specify the document type. And so inside the document type, which you can see an example of here, it just gives the location of where the DTD is for this version of XHTML. So you can see it here. It says the location of the DTD is http ://www.w3.org trxhtml/dtd/xhtml1-strict.dtd. So this is just given the location of the DTD that's used to validate the contents of this web page, or to validate the tags used in the construction of this web page. Then what you'll see here is a schema definition right here. All right, so this is just another line that's required for XHTML that indicates the language right here. And once you have those two in place, then the next thing it should contain is the heading. So you have the head tag right here. Then you'll have the title, any metadata for the content. Right here, you'll see that's added. Then you would have a script, right? So if you have any JavaScript files, you would have that. You would also necessarily could have, the next thing would be a link to a style sheet. And then you close the heading tag, and that completes a properly formatted heading. All right, once you go below this, you'll see that there's a body tag, and within the body tag is actually where you're going to place your HTML tags to organize your content and the actual content itself. And then finally you'll see there's a tag to close the body, the /body tag, and then there's a /HTML here to close the HTML tag from at the top. So to summarize this, XHTML is focused on content. It's a way to store content inside a web page. It is not a way to make a web page look attractive or control the design. In fact, in building your web pages, you should not have any type of colors or font sizes or any styling of the visual styling attributes applied to your HTML. In fact, they won't validate in XHTML, and you just shouldn't use them because they're just going to create problems down the road. Because if you embed styling into the web page, if you want to update that web page, you're going to have to go back to it and change it. If you keep your styling attributes such as color and font size and text decorations inside your cascading style sheet file, then you can change the cascading style sheet file, and then all your web pages will be updated. So it's a bad idea to put any sort of styling attributes inside HTML tags. All right. When you combine both of these technologies, XHTML and CSS, you'll create very search engine friendly and well-constructed web pages. So your goal is to develop a web application or web page that outputs XHTML content that is styled using CSS files. Included with the page is the best method for creating modern human and machine readable content. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the different XHTML tags that are valid. This link right here to W3C Schools will list all of the tags for you. All of these tags are valid for XHTML. All right, so basically CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It was developed to make an easy way to implement the graphical design of a web page. Originally, this solved the problem of being able to update many web pages at one time. This is essential for web application development because CSS allows a program to output styled HTML that can be adjusted through a common CSS file that a designer can manipulate and not necessarily a web programmer. Because you have to imagine that if someone was creating by hand a few web pages, the cascading style sheet is very useful to be able to manipulate the visual appearance of just a few web pages. But if you have an application such as like Facebook or any other computer program that is actually producing and styling the content that is in the web page, or producing web pages, then it's really essential that the thousands of different possible web pages that an application, or millions of different possible web pages that an application like Facebook might output, there has to be a common way to adjust the look and feel of those web pages. It would be impossible to have something like that without this. And CSS is not very complicated once you understand some of the basics. All right, the first item here, this is a diagram of what how to write cascading style sheets. All right, so the first thing to pay attention to on the left-hand slide is the selector. Now, there can be 3 different types of selectors, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in here, this example is using the H1 tag as the selector. The selector is used to identify what element or item on a web page is being manipulated. Then what you'll see is what's called the declaration, and the declaration is simply what properties are you going to specify for that element. And in this case, what this line is saying is that for the H1 tag, the heading 1 tag, declare it to be blue with a font size of 12 pixels. So what you'll see is you always have a selector, you have a property, and you have a value. Properties and values are separated by semicolons for each one, and the entire declaration is wrapped up in 2 curly braces, an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. There are 3 different types of selectors in cascading style sheets. The first selector for cascading style sheets is the H1 tag, is the HTML tag, and in this case it's the H1 tag. Any HTML tag can be used as a selector. The second type of selector is what's called a class selector, and a class selector is specified this way. So you put a period, then you put a name. In this case, I use class selector example, and then I have my declaration. So, and then finally, you have an ID selector. So an ID selector will have a pound sign next to it, and then it will have the ID underscore selector, and it will wrap it up in curly braces for the actual declaration for the element that is being selected. In general, you should always use existing HTML tags as your selectors. You should not create new classes or IDs unless it is necessary. Now, what you can do, it's important to understand the difference between classes and IDs. All right? A class is a selector that can be used many times in a HTML document or in a cascading style sheet to style the document, and an ID is used once in a HTML document. So, for example, and what you'll find in general is that you'll always use classes. The only reason that you're going to use IDs is where you're going to specify a region on a web page. And in the second part of this lesson, we're going to get into how to specify regions and create layouts using cascading style sheets. But for general styling, the rule of thumb is always use the HTML selector or the HTML tag selector. If for some reason you need to do something special that doesn't fit with that, then you can use the class selector. And finally, if you are creating a layout in cascading style sheets, you're going to use the ID selectors, but they can only be used once in each document. Now, we saw how the ID selector. Now, what I'm going to do is basically go through how CSS selectors are applied within the HTML code. Originally, we looked at how you define styles in a style sheet, but now we're going to look at how you apply those styles to a inside the web page. Now, if you use the HTML tags, if you use a selector of an HTML tag, anytime that HTML tag appears in the web page, it will inherit that style. So there's no, you don't have to modify your HTML code to add an ID or a class for if you're using one of the HTML elements as your selector. Now, here, what you see here, this is how you specify an ID selector. So if I have an open bracket P ID equals ID selector, close the brackets, then whatever style was applied for an ID selector, that would be what is applied to this P tag. And in the same case, I could do this. I could do P class equals class selector example, and that would apply that any class styles that I had identified in my cascading style sheet for class. Now here's an important thing to understand. Let's say you want to be able to have a location in your web page, and that location, you want all of the P tags, all the paragraph tags, any text to be within that paragraph tag to be the color aqua. So what you would do is create a division called pound first, or an ID called pound first, and apply that to a division. And then any P tags within that division would be styled. So what you basically can do here is combine a ID selector and an HTML tag to style the content. We're going to look at examples of this in HTML code if this isn't totally apparent. Then you could also do a region such as pound second LI color blue. So if you want to target what elements are going to be styled in a given area of your website, you can combine the ID and HTML tag selectors to target exactly where you're going to style. And the same thing goes for CSS divs and class selection. So you can select a division or use the ID selector and then combine that with a class to target where that class would be applied. So in this case, if you see, I have pound first dot color is red. I have pound second dot color is blue. And here in the HTML, I would see that I have a div ID equals first. This is the ID for first that we saw on the previous slide. And then my P tag, I have class equals color. And when I looked at the web page, since my P tag and I have a class of, since I'm in the first div, ID, and I'm using a paragraph tag with the application of class color, I have red. If I have down here div ID equals second, you have p class equals color and blue, and it would appear as being blue. So we can go back and you can see how this style sheet declaration is being applied to the HTML in this way, and this is how this would work. There are 3 different ways to apply style sheets. The first way to apply a style sheet is what's called an inline style, where you can have the HTML tag, in this case a p tag, and then you type style, and then you put your declaration within the quotes here. This is, in general, you never want to do this. The reason you never want to do this is because this is putting the cascading style sheet code embedded into the web page, which is just it's going against the idea of creating a style sheet that you can use to update all of your web pages through one file. It's going to embed the styles into the code, which is just a bad idea. You don't want to do this. The preferred method of formatting styles or using a cascading style sheet is to use an external file. So in this case, inside the head tags of your HTML page, you would create a link to a style sheet, in this case called style.css, and then anything that was in that style sheet would be included into your web page. So you could use this link tag on every web page that you had, and then every web page would be styled using the style.css file. There is a third way to do this, which is sort of a combination between the two, which is good for development. You can, inside your head tag, if you want, you can put your HTML or your cascading style sheets in the you can put your style sheet declarations inside the head tag or inside the head area of your web page. And then what's kind of useful, good workflow, is if I'm working on a web page, I will put the cascading style sheet declarations in the head of the web page, but then I will, when I'm finished working on the web page, I will copy and paste them out of the head section of the web page and put them into a style sheet and then link to that style sheet. And whenever we do our examples, that's what we're going to do. So I'll show you how that's actually done. And so this basically completes the basics of how cascading style sheets work. We didn't go over all of the different properties for cascading style sheets. That's what's going to be what we're going to talk about, some of those in the subsequent lecture.